I'm presenting this today. My name is Martin Charter for the Centre for Sustainable Design, and we will have colleagues. Also, my colleague Virginie will be joining with a couple of comments towards the end of the presentation, followed by additional comments from colleagues from UKFT and BSI. So before I start, and can we start the recording if we haven't done already?
Yeah, I've started it.
Yeah, great, thank you. This presentation has been built up by detailed research based on our knowledge of looking at sort of European product policy over quite a long period of time. However, we're not lawyers, so any action you take is on your own responsibility. So we bear no responsibility for any actions taken as a result of what you hear. And again, for anybody that has joined, please disable any AI recording devices, as we do not allow these in our webinars. Thanks very much for doing that, and please keep muted and cameras off for bandwidth. So what we're going to do is a bit of an overview of ESPR to start off with, and then drill into digital product passport, with trying to draw out some of the implications for the fashion and clothing sector. And again, please add any questions to the chat as succinct and clear as you can. So, as I mentioned, I'm from the Centre for Sustainable Design at UCA, and we're a partner in the Just Fashion project. Just Fashion project is a European funded project with multiple partners throughout Europe that is exploring, particularly our role is exploring the policy and standards development in the sector. Also, there is work going on circular business models, pilots with SMEs, and the development of digital tools and an AI-based solution, really looking at the whole issues around circularity and broader sustainability issues across the fashion and clothing sector, particularly with reference to SMEs. So before, as I mentioned, we go into DPP, it's important to have the overall context on this from a European perspective. So really, circular economy started to come into the European legislation in 2015 with a Circular Economy Action Plan. That was then followed up in 2019 with the Green Deal, which is a much more of a wider framework initiative, and that set the basis for the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products regulation, and also the non-binding roadmap on sustainable and circular textiles that has informed some of the developments behind the scenes. What then has happened from a sort of overall policies perspective is the Green Deal Industrial Plan has been also launched, and the two elements to that are the Critical Raw Materials Act that are perhaps less relevant to clothing and textiles, but also the Circular Economy Act. Originally, this appeared to be more focused on the electronics sector, but it seems to be potentially broader than that. We'll come back to that. So again, I'm going to skip through some of these slides for time. What was important about the Circular Economy Action Plan number 2 that was embedded in the Green Deal is effectively it started to highlight making sustainability sort of the norm across product categories, and bringing in new product categories that had previously not been focused on. Historically, a lot of the activity around the product side, both EPR and product-related eco-design from an energy point of view, had been focused more on the electronics and automotive sector, with other regulations around packaging. But it brought in new sectors like textiles, clothing and fashion that really hadn't been covered by this type of legislation in the past. So as I mentioned more recently, and I'll come back to some of the detail there. The Circular Economy Act has been launched, or the announcement has happened by Ursula von der Leyen, and it is being led by DG Environment, and it's really talking about primarily retaining materials in the European market, so developing secondary materials markets. There is a consultation out where stakeholders can respond to DG Environment with a deadline of November the 16th. Just Fashion are coordinating something on the fashion and clothing sector. So if you have any comments and you're not providing those comments through other routes, please feel free to come back to their team at Just Fashion, and I'm sure they'll be keen to hear from you. So there is expected to be a Circular Economy Act next year, but the specific details are unclear. So the ESPR came into focus in 18th of July last year as a single market act, with a goal to drive circular economy across potentially all products. It's a framework directive, so it doesn't set specific regulation itself, but it sets the framework for regulations, and it builds on the former eco-design directive that focused on reducing energy consumption in products, in energy-related products, so taking one criteria in one product. So what is happening with the ESPR is it's a substantial and a strategic piece of policy, in that it's expanding to potentially all products, all sectors, and expanding from one specific criteria, i.e. reducing energy in the consumption phase, to potentially legislation that draws on potentially 16 different criteria. Those criteria or requirements will be aligned to the different product categories. So again, repeating some of this is, to move towards a circular economy, to develop common EU-wide rules on product circularity, better data, harmonized regulations, and to align with other activities in the climate change agenda. So as highlighted here, the key issues are the extension of the scope, the new requirements, horizontal approach, and bringing in new substantial developments around product information and labeling, notably the digital product passport. So ESPR includes, we reckon, about 5 different elements. We have product regulations, delegated acts. There's a digital product passport, a ban on the destruction of unsold goods that is also particularly relevant to the fashion clothing sector, green public procurement, and substances of concern. We're primarily going to focus on the first 2 today. So they set up a generic, a process for each of the product categories. And again, I'll sort of jump a bit and come back to it. The 2 products that are in the front line of this are clothing and textiles, and iron and steel. Clothing and textiles as a finished product, and iron and steel as a intermediary product, a materials-based product. So the generic approach for this is a preparatory study that is completed by the JRC in the Commission. That study then goes into the consultation forum, the Ecodesign forum, which includes 200 plus stakeholders who provide feedback, on any regulatory proposals, and then if those proposals are passed, then those will be adopted within 18 months. So the eco-design requirements split into information requirements and performance requirements. Those information requirements, although it's not stated there, or it is in blue, there is labeling requirements. So there is a consultation that has recently been out, looking at potentially expanding the existing energy labels to include more information on product circularity. So there's labeling, there's digital product passports, and other areas as we highlighted here. Linked particularly for the delegated acts, there are performance requirements, and those performance requirements can be both qualitative and quantitative. So these are going to be very important, particularly at the design and development stage for any of those product categories, mostly clothing and textiles. And there will be major issues, particularly about how are you going to tackle this within the design and development teams, and how you're going to communicate this out lightly to your outsourced suppliers. So again, that's repeating this in a bit more detail, so I won't go into this. The key elements that are out there and highlighted in the framework regulations are 16 requirements that might be chosen for, dependent on their applicability to the relevant product categories. So the sort of criteria, you know, for textiles and clothing, for example, will be different from iron and steel or furniture, for example. So, you know, one thing that seems to be clear from all the information that we've had is that repairability will be a cross-cutting issue across all product categories. However, you know, as with a lot of the information that we're finding, there's slightly contradictory information. I was recently in a webinar where the Commission was presenting, and again, there is a webinar around a study that I think the JRC is kicking off around repairability that seems to be highlighted as being focused on the electronics sector. So it's still somewhat unclear, although it's stated in a regulation that, you know, the framework regulations that repairability is going to cover all product categories. Again, you've got these slightly confusing and inconsistent information. So clearly, you know, topics like, you know, repairability, recycled content, you know, reuse, you know, durability, you know, etc., may well be some of the topics that the product requirements may focus on in the clothing and textile sector. So what sits behind that whole process is a 5-year working plan, and this 5-year working plan can be downloaded from the I believe the DG Environment website. And this really talks about many of the issues that we've highlighted before. It sets out an action plan for 5 years around the different elements of ESPR, with the key issues being driving circularity and resource efficiency, developing horizontal requirements, enhancing transparency through digital product passport and harmonization. As mentioned, there was recently in the labeling side of this, and we shouldn't forget the labeling side of this, because this is the way or one of the means that some of the performance related requirements will be communicated. There was a stakeholder consultation out ran on behalf of the Commission that put forward some ideas related to what labeling for products might look like under ESPR that included various circularity aspects. So there's obviously some sort of study going on in terms of the, you know, what may emerge in future labeling. The ESP timelines are and we've constructed this from published information that we found on Commission websites and in Commission presentations, but some of this is still somewhat unclear. So what is clear is that the working plan was published in April. Although an act on unsold goods was supposed to be passed in Q3, I think we're out of Q3 now, so we haven't seen that act being published yet. Similarly, there is due to be acts related to various aspects of DPP. All the indications on that are they are being delayed to 2026. Confusingly, despite what seems to be fairly clear now, that the delegated act for clothing and textiles is likely to be published at the back end of 2026 or the beginning of 2027. It is stated that there will be a delegated act on textiles digital product passport. This is very confusing because until one really knows what's going to be in the product regulations, how is one going to sort of determine, the content side of the digital product passport? Essentially, the digital product passport splits crudely into two areas: the content side, what will be in it, what are the topics that are going to be covered, and what the IT and let's say the IT infrastructure of that will be. So again, this is chicken and egg situation, and a confusing part of the process. That if anybody has any clarification on this, we'd be very grateful in hearing about it. So essentially, the delegated acts, for example, for clothing and textiles, essentially will impact on those that are placing products, i.e. textiles and clothing products, on the European market. And they will be manufacturers, the companies that will have to comply with this, whether it be delegated acts on textiles and clothing or specific DPP requirements related to textiles and clothing, will be manufacturers or their authorized representatives or importers. So a lot of, if you're really keen to try and get behind some of this, a lot of the structural elements of this, you'll be able to it might be useful to read the former Ecodesign Directive, because many of the broad structural requirements legislatively will broadly follow the same process. But again, if you take action on that and whatever, that is your own responsibility to do that. And we cannot be held liable for any actions you take. So in terms of product priorities and exclusions, there was a big piece of work done by the Commission looking across multiple products, and indeed, in terms of final products, textiles and apparel came up with the highest ranking, and that's why the activity is happening in terms of the potential delegated act to come in at the end of 26, early 2027, and also, as I mentioned, on intermediary products on iron and steel. We're purely focusing on textiles and clothing here. There are other product exclusions, and again, if one's followed the processes, at some stage it looked like footwear would be included alongside apparel, but then they changed the strategy, and now footwear alongside detergents and chemicals seem to be viewed as either exclusions or separate topic areas for legislation. So again, it was chosen, textiles as chosen because of high potential improvement potential, a large market share, high volume of sales, and major environmental impact. And that is significant. If we look at waste, we look at emissions, we look at water consumption, we look at use of substances of concern. There are significant impacts. And again, for those who are newer to this sector, without plugging my book too much, Accelerating Sustainability in the Fashion, Clothing, Textile Sector might give you a useful overview of the issues. So in terms of the preparatory development for the delegated acts, the Commission is preparing this preparatory study. There is a schedule that I'll highlight. We're slightly unclear precisely where they are in their schedule, if they are on track or it's falling behind. In scope, as we are, various products, including t-shirts, sweaters, jackets, and then there's a number of items excluding, such as home textiles, footwear, etc. So there's various stages to this preparatory study, and as we understand it, according to the timeline, the schedule should be at the environmental and economic analysis. So looking at specific products, trying to understand textiles and clothing products, understand the environmental impacts, looking at LCA, but also looking at lifetime environmental costing through LCC. So there is a lot of background research going on at the moment, and I think I'm not quite clear where, for example, this repairability study sits within this, or is it separate, or is it, that I mentioned earlier, is this part of this or aligned to this or purely in electronics? These are the sort of some of the challenges we're facing as we're going through and trying to understand what's going on. So the preparatory study is expected at the end of 2025. In 2026 there will be an impact. So the preparatory study aims to complete the stages 5 to 7 by the end of this year, and then there will be an impact assessment of design options in 2026 that will feed into the development of the delegated act back end of 2026 or Q1 2027, based on what we've found. And when the legislation is passed, there'll be 18 months for member states to transition into national regulations as we understand it. So the earliest time these requirements will come into effect, as we understand it, will be mid to late 2028. So digital product passport, again, this is part of eco-design requirements. This is part of the information requirements. And from a content point of view, will cover in the textiles and clothing sector, various requirements that have not been specifically identified yet. But I think probably, in the sector, you will know the sorts of product requirements from this listing that are more likely to be considered. So DPP is a digital tool. It will be accessed using a unique identifier. There is a lot of confusion out there as to the usage of the term digital product passport. We're referring to EU digital product passport here. There are various digital tools and services out there that claim to be digital product passports, but in the context of the EU digital product passports, they're clearly not applicable yet, because we do not have legislation, we do not have standards published yet. So I'd be very wary of any supplier who claims that their tool or process will enable you to be compliant with EU DPP, because we simply do not have that information yet. So the goal of this is to empower stakeholders to have better information, and verify product environmental claims. A key sentence that exists within the working plan, I'll just read out directly, that I read it. I've now read it several times, and in lieu of the information we've received, it provides the additional area of potential confusion for me. So the information to be collected and made available in a digital product passport will be specified in product-specific delegated acts under ESPR and possibly under other legislation where applicable. So what I originally read this as and in conversation with other experts, how I originally read this was there would be relevant DPP regulation aligned to the delegated acts to be published in late 2026, early 2027. But then when we've accessed further information, we're seeing the separate earlier delegated acts on DPP and textiles to be published early next year. So really, it is very unclear, are DPP going to have aligned regulations to the Delegated Product Act, the product requirements, or is there going to be some sort of separate regulations that somehow align to that? So this is really unclear and part of the challenge we're facing. So the idea is to be able to access this complex set of data, and it will allow for multiple stakeholders, including customs and other authorities, to do automatic checks on the existence or on authenticity of DPP of imported products. So this will be very obviously significantly important for this sector, because a significant proportion of products will be made maybe in China, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Vietnam, for example. So this whole issue of the access of data at customs is going to be an important point. There are a variety of details that are specified on DPP in Article 9 of ESPR, but this is really, that sets out some of the basis for potential regulations. So another confusing part of this, although DPP is central within the ESPR framework directive as a sort of dedicated component, what we're finding is there is also reference to DPP in other product regulations. So, DPP will become the main tool related to eco-design under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulations that potentially can cover all products and all regulations. All products and all sectors, but there are specific references in other standalone legislation that is both sort of materials or product focused. So you've got sort of, again, maybe over time those other products will be aligned with ESPR, but you've got this sort of patchy set of initiatives out there. So essentially the DPP really covers two key areas: the how, which really relates much more to the IT infrastructure of this, and again I won't go into the details of this, but there are a lot of technical aspects to the information architecture, if you like, crudely the bucket that the data will go into, the product data. So there's the information architecture side of that. And then you've got the what side of this, what will go into this? What is going to be the content? Excuse me, the technical performance data, environmental performance data, linking back to those, requirements, to circularity. Manuals, etc., etc. So you've got the how and the what. So, in terms of the how, there is going to be some form of registry and portal. And again, I'm going to sort of skip through this. And there will be different responsibilities and different stakeholders in the overall system. So the Commission will be one stakeholder, those placing on the product will be one stakeholder with responsibility, and there'll be service providers. There will also be a requirement for a backup services to make sure that any products that go out of business, there is a backup in terms of their product data, if and when their products come to the end of life. It is quite complicated, and I think I will refer people back to something called JCT10, which I'll cover, that is covering a lot of the details of the IT infrastructure. The Commission have been doing a variety of impact studies on DPP, and they're particularly what has been, we haven't seen a publication of this, but the Commission did a consultation on service providers, with a view to developing a scheme to potentially register and evaluate service providers. So what may happen, and as I say may, is there may be some sort of system where suppliers of DPP services that align to the regulatory developments have to comply with that, and maybe are registered into a database to offer their services on the market. That's my interpretation of it. But again, this is pending, regulation and standards. So I'm not sure if the Commissioner is going to provide a survey, a report in the public domain on this, but I guess many service providers will be very interested to hear what's in that. So there was quite a lot of responses. So again, if we look at the DPP timeline here, we can see here that DPP standards that have been developed by CEN-CENELEC are due to be finished by the end of this year, and I'll come back to that. Again, from a Techstars point of view, as we highlighted earlier, our understanding of what is stated in the schedule is a delegated act to Techstars DPP. That's what we found, but we're really unclear what that actually means. And then what we also found is then that delegated act for DPP is claimed to come into force by July 2027, but then we have to overlay this with, the fact that the actual delegated act for Techstars is likely to come in December or Q1 2027. So it's really quite unclear. So again, this is another timeline that we've found, we've received from CEN-CENELEC, the European standards body, and essentially what it's highlighting is that the standards will be, published at the end of 2025, and with a view to a publication of a variety of standards on the information architecture around Q1 2026. There is likely then to be the announcement of a delegated act on DPP. It's saying here in mid 2026, and then the regulations will come into force on the DPP in 2027. So we've got two sets of issues. We've got the delegated act on clothing and textiles end of 2026, early 2027, and then we got the DPP on clothing and textiles. Uncertainty around, if that's going to come into force next year, are going to be, passed next year and then come into force in 2027. So again, it's a very confusing picture. So, again, this is just repeating this. Key element of this, or key part of the picture, is that in July 2026, the DPP registry will come into place. So this will be the repository for DPP data. I'm unclear if the Commission have, as I understood, there was a proposal that they were going to let a contract for the development of this registry. I'm unclear if that's happened. And again, I would suggest you take your own routes to investigate that. So it appears there's still there is a lot of uncertainty, and seems like things are being delayed. So in terms of standardization, in moving towards the end of the presentation, there are a number of key standardization activities in place. Within CEN, JTTC 24, ISO TC 154, ISO PWI 255341, a proposed ISO AC digital product passport, another proposal from IEC, and China Techstars DPP. So sense and elect, on the request from the Commission, on a standardization request from the Commission, set up after that request in May 2023, in April 2024, a technical committee or joint technical committee to take forward standardization activities in around DPP. And this has been accelerated in pace with, I believe, a German chair and a Swedish secretariat. So there is a range of different working groups that have been set up within this technical committee, with various working groups focusing on different areas and different standards developing within those different working groups. So those standards are moving forward and have been submitted as a pre-EN, and EN means European standard. So they passed the inquiry stage, consultation and commenting at a national perspective, and the focus now is in the working groups on the comment resolutions with a view to finalization of the draft. So once the comments are integrated from all the national NSBs, the national standards bodies in Europe, then there will be, a final vote. The deadlines for the harmonized standards is the end of this year, and I believe that if we look at this timeline here, then the idea is that all those standards are completed by the end of this year, and there is a preparation for a final vote with a view to a publication of these standards in the end of Q1 2026. So my understanding is that process is on track. There's been a huge amount of activity within these technical groups, over 200 experts involved. Again, from a meeting I was recently involved in with the chair of JTC 24, was that there has been quite a significant amount of input from the relevant product sectors. So within the sector, I assume a number of the trade associations and European bodies have been feeding, different aspects related to the clothing and textile sector into the process, as have others in other sectors. So that is the standardization process covering the information architecture side. So that, again, we're still missing this sort of what goes in it part of it, the delegated act part of it. There is also now DPP activity happening within a long-standing ISO group around data processes and registration and data and information exchange for international trade, and a secretariat. The secretariat for this is held by China, and there is involvement in this from the major global employers organization. So there is activity that has started around this to set up a preliminary work item, i.e. a first stage development, an early draft related to digital product passports. So again, this is focused very much on the information architecture point of view, the data interchange aspects of this. So again, covering the data parts of this. Again, China presented the initial idea and the submission, and our understanding is the first draft of this standard will be finalized and submitted at the end of 2025. So that potentially means that if it voted successfully through balloting, then there will be some form of process and working group set up in 2026. So there is a new joint technical committee proposal that has come in on digital product passports, or is in train at the moment, from a joint technical committee between ISO and IEC that has been put forward by Germany, who are also coordinating a working group and technical activity within a SEN group on circular economy on information exchange. They put forward a proposal that is out for circulation, and will be a closing date for comments around a high-level ISO IEC digital product passport process. That will be concluded at the end of November. There are 4 work streams for this, covering different elements that you can see here. Again, what I should have mentioned is this is being recorded, and we will provide you with a link to the recording over the next sort of week or so. So don't worry if you haven't been able to pick everything up or not been able to screenshot everything. So separately, and again, we've picked this up, this may be more direct related to the electronics sector through the IEEE, which is an electronics group. There is another standard that's in train, again proposed by China on digital product passports, that again it is focused much more around the sort of data management side of things. So again, at an ISO and in ISO, IEC and SEN, there's a variety of standards in development, and one can see the potential for crossover and the need for coordination of this and liaison between these different groups to ensure, from a sort of global and a European basis, we don't go off in different lines of activity. And in line with that, there is a China DPP that is in development, that is being led by China Academy of ICT, if you like, and they released a report on DPP technology development, outlining China's DPP framework and roadmap. And they will hold the responsibility for the development of DPP with other key stakeholders, including the standards body and the relevant ministry in China, the Ministry of Industry. Again, it's tackling these 3 questions, but again, the key elements and why this is very relevant for this is the first sectors they are focusing on are clothing and textiles, and the specific textiles DPP that is being developed within China is being coordinated by China National Textile Apparel Coalition, with other organizations involved, to launch the general rules and technical specifications for textile products. It was launched in August 2025, and as it's stated here, and has initiated standards drafting in 2024 for completion in 2025. I'm not clear if they're on schedule. We found it very difficult to find information in English language or even in Chinese on the details of this. But I think clearly, I think what we can say is that China is developing something in response to European developments as a major supplier of textiles products. And it's something that should be watched for any of you who are supplying to China or sourcing from China. So just in closing, what are some of the implications for SMEs in the sector? It's complex enough for the experts and the large companies involved in this, but if you're not a member of a trade association or other relevant bodies, it's even more difficult to track. So our key recommendations generally in this area is if you're an SME, make regulations and standards a standing board item. So move this up into board level discussions. Start to allocate somebody half or 1 day a week to monitoring this, because you can see this is going to have significant implications across multiple areas. Develop some sort of system to track regulations and standards, and to start to track the dates as they become clearer, so you have time to prepare your various activities and line activities. So consider the impact across, strategic planning, design, procurement, IT, supply chain, and logistics. So start to really move quickly on this, because if one is delaying this may be a major challenge. Just continuously monitor from your various sources, and do your best to monitor the regulatory development and consider what it's going to mean for your products, and particularly start to engage with your suppliers on this early. From a DPP point of view, this essentially is all around information. So our recommendations would be to start to really track product related sustainability and circularity data. What are the environmental impacts of the products, the components and sub-assemblies? What sort of data do you have? What sort of data do you need to find? Where are the gaps? Where are the hotspots? Collaborating maybe with universities on projects to help to start to generate that data. This is also going to be relevant because there is separate regulations that are already passed that's tightening up green claims. So there's going to be a need to back up green claims with better data. The challenges, of course, generating this data from scratch can be costly if you have to work through consultancies. So, looking at collaborations with maybe employer organizations, universities, or other research bodies to start to generate this data early will be a sensible starting point. So sorry, I've a lot of details there. And we're going to run a little bit over time now, so I think we'll run perhaps to 11:15 if we need to. Because it's really important, I think, to have, some comments now from Ava, from the industry, in terms of, how she sees things, to correct me where I've got things wrong, or to say, yes, indeed, there is confusion, and sit on a similar basis from Sarah from a standardization point of view. We'll then open it up for questions, but over to Ava.
Hi everyone, I am Ava and I work for the UK Fashion and Textiles Association. Just in general, my role at UKFT, there's sort of two sides to it. So I advise our members with their regulatory obligations, so what they need to comply with to sell their product to global markets. But I do also work with policymakers, so I work quite closely with the European Commission. We're a member of Eurotex, feeding into the European Commission, and also obviously the UK government as well. So I think great overview from Martin, and thank you for having me on today. Generally, our advice to the industry at the moment is not to panic. It's obviously, it sounds like a lot of information and a lot of things that you might need to do. But our most recent guidance from the European Commission at the moment is that the Delegated Act for Textiles and Apparel on the DPP is not going to enter into force until 2027. And under the ESPR regulation, which has already been written, it must have a minimum of 18 months as an implementation period. So that would mean if it enters into force at the beginning of 2027, it would not become effective. So you would not need to comply until mid-2028 at the earliest. And that's if it does enter into force at the beginning of 2027. So obviously there's room for that to be mid-2027, late 2027, which ultimately will push the date of compliance back. It's worth pointing out that one of UKFT's positions on this, as many other national associations across the EU member states, is that we are requesting that implementation period be extended. Obviously, the ESPR specifically states a minimum of 18 months. We think that 24 months, 36 months is more applicable. It's more relevant to the sector in terms of practicality. So we are requesting that. Whether we'll be successful in that is obviously another thing, but that is something that we are asking for. So in terms of what businesses can do now, obviously Martin's obviously mentioned data organizing, but typically you could wait. If it doesn't enter into force until 2027, we don't know what's going to be written into these delegated acts. We don't know what implementing acts they might write to support with the delegated acts and ESPR. There's lots of discussions, which Martin has obviously touched on today, in terms of, whether the DPP service providers are going to be regulated themselves, whether there's standards that they'll have to meet, whether there'll be a list of approved service providers. So there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. So if a business did just want to wait until these written texts are published and adopted, I think that's reasonable. And typically that is our advice at the moment. Waiting until we know what is going to be included for certain, and what your actual obligations are as a business. So hopefully that covers everything. Have I touched on things, Martin?
Yeah, no, I think it's that tension between wait and see and starting on things that you think might happen. So I guess that's the balance that companies will have to make the decision they will have to make.
Absolutely.
I mean, clearly things are changing and something is likely to emerge, but it's down to the specific details and the specific timelines, I guess, is the challenge. Yeah, I think that point that you're making, I think, about extending the 18 months to 36 months, I would say, to me makes a lot of sense, because the sector hasn't faced this sort of regulation compared to electronics or automotive or packaging. So, to me, that would make a lot of sense. What I'd also do is to bring in Virginie, because in trying to get through all the slides, we jumped over a couple of points that Virginia picked up in terms of inconsistencies and stuff in the text, or what we'd found, and we'd like to perhaps see if you had any comments on it. You might say, no, I have no comment, but then that could also lead in also to Sarah's comments, as well, more generally on standards and on anything, any comments she has on this. So over to you, Virginia. Could you mention it verbally, because I don't want to play around with the PowerPoints again.
All right, no worries. So yeah, there was a few points to discuss. So kind of uncertainty we have, and when we do our research. So there was something about, what Martin mentioned about timeline. So if you know anything about it, like, because we've seen different sources from different industry sources or more official ones about the different delegated acts in DPP. Like there was one about textile DPP, some mentioned in January 2026, but some other mentioned more in 2027. And that is a bit confusing, because we also know, based on our research and what the ESPR regulation is saying, is that the DPP for textile should also be linked with the more the one that is about the project for ESPR. Project related to textile. So they should be linked together. So my understanding is that the delegated act for DPP textile shouldn't theoretically come after or like very close to the one about the project requirement for textile under ESPR. So this is one main uncertainty we're having, confusion in regards to this deadline. There's one I'm a bit more sure is about the delegated act for DPP that we mentioned about service provider. That is a bit more related to governance. That is supposed to be for early 2026. But yeah, there's quite a big confusion about this, the links between ESPR delegated act and the one on DPP. And then if you know anything about how the DPP will align with all different EU regulations that we mentioned a bit in the presentation. So how this will all align together. So that was some kind of uncertainty. So if you have anything, please let us know. But yeah.
Yes, yeah, no, it's I mean, we are following all of the developments. I mean, even this morning I was in a meeting on the Circular Economy Act and somehow that sort of might interact with some of the things that have been discussed today. Obviously, it's all discussion points, so you know I won't repeat any of the information. It might not even happen, but with the delegated act for the DPP for textiles and apparel, our latest information is that it is scheduled to enter into force in 2027. With an 18-month implementation period, which would make it mandatory for businesses to comply mid-2028 or later. So that is our from a compliance perspective for businesses, obviously on the call today, that's our guidance. With in regards to other delegated acts, it's moving around. It's hard to say sort of when they will. There's a lot of different scheduled dates, and I think there's going to be a lot of different delegated acts and implementing acts under the ESPR. Obviously, we're aware of the ones that we're aware of the DPP substances of concern, unsold goods. They've already been discussed. There's lots of consultations. There's even draft papers on the unsold goods already. So, we know that they're moving along, but I think as a lot of the consultations and research has developed into the DPP, there is now ideas or discussion points that there might be other delegated acts and implementing acts, which is potentially why the dates are looking a little bit confusing in terms of what might enter into force when and become effective when. But I think for the DPP, delegated act in terms of compliance for businesses, our latest from Brussels is that will enter into force in 2027, becoming effective in 2028 if the 18-month implementation period is decided upon. So that's sort of where we're at the moment.
So can I just point of clarification on what you've said, but you may not have clarity because of the Commission, is do you think, I mean, therefore, that the delegated act for clothing and textiles now slated to be end of 2026, early 2027, will be published, and then the DPP for textiles published after the delegated act? Or do you see them in some way aligned in around Q1 2027? Do you see what I mean?
Yes. So I'm going to give you my opinion rather than, so just based on discussions, I would say yes. Just based on how the discussions are going and the conversations and the consultation, how things are sort of lying at the moment, yes. So the delegated act for textiles would come first before the DPP. I think what's affecting the DPP at the moment is there are a lot of different consultations, a lot of different discussions, a lot of things feeding into it. There's also a lot of projects. So you've got the things like the SURPASS to finalise. I know that SEN's obviously doing a lot of work. So there are many factors that could push that back if and delay it. There's many moving parts to it. And I think it's again, important that you had your slide on how there might be a DPP in the toy reg, for example. Those elements also could affect whether, when the Textiles DPP Act enters into force. There are many sort of moving parts that could affect those dates. So yes, I think from my perspective and in my opinion, it would come after.
Yeah, just got one final question before passing over to Sarah. Our understanding, and this is like even 12, 18 months ago, at that stage, there were over 100 publicly funded projects on digital product passport across multiple sectors. And constantly surplus comes up on surplus 2, etc., 1 and 2. But surely that is just one of the 100+ projects. It seems to get a significant amount of airtime relative to other projects. So is your view that it is much more closely aligned with what's happening within the Commission, or it's just the project managers for surplus 2 are selling it very well as a sort of core source of information? So what's your view?
Difficult one to answer. It's linked. It is linked with the European Commission. So the results of those working groups are likely to be used by the European Commission. Obviously, there's other projects going on. It is very difficult to say, which sort of pilot projects or just projects in general on the DPP will ultimately be used in the development of the regulatory texts. Brussels is heavily association led, just on the basis that that's they get a lot of their information direct from businesses and stakeholders that are affected by regulation through associations. So ultimately, there will be a lot of involvement from the likes of UKFT, Eurotex. There's some major associations that feed into regulatory development. So a lot of the project work could feed as a base in terms of outcomes, and obviously there's a lot of research as well that will serve as a base. But ultimately, the European Commission does and has been, especially through 2025, which I think is why it's felt very confusing throughout this year. The European Commission is heavily focused on reducing administrative burden and cost for businesses. That is why we've seen a lot of movement on some of the regulatory decisions that were made in 2024. So yes, a lot of the project work will feed in and probably serve as a base. But ultimately, they will be looking at they will be looking for industry feedback. Is this feasible? Is it practical? And that's something that we heavily, speak to the European Commission and Eurotex about. Is this something that businesses can do right now? I mean, one of the most recent discussions that we've been having with Eurotex and the European Commission is actually, would it be better for the DPP to be very, very basic in phase 1 and then be phased in over time? And that's probably looking more likely. Is there going to be very basic requirements, and then over time they will develop it to have more complex data requirements. I'm again saying that looks more likely. That could change in a few months. It could change tomorrow. But it's worth highlighting that a focus of the current European Commission is business administrative burden and cost. And that ultimately will have an effect on a lot of the research and projects feeding in, and associations also feeding in as stakeholders.
So in summary, there's a lot of moving parts that are going to continue to be moving for some time. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge, but I guess it will be down to, particularly for the SMEs who maybe not necessarily members of the trade associations, to decide whether they wait and see, or they do just start to prepare slowly but surely for the change.
Absolutely.
Sarah, did you have any comments? So thanks very much, Ava. Very comprehensive as always, and very useful. And Sarah, did you have any comments from a standards or broader perspective? You're muted. Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
I unmuted and then immediately muted myself, which was very clever of me. Yeah, I mean, that was an extremely comprehensive overview of us, as I think Sue in the chat said, a very murky situation. Which is still very murky for everybody because there's so much happening, as you say, you know, so many moving parts. I think my point would be, I mean, you covered off very, very well that there is a lot of standards activity alongside a lot of the regulatory activity that is going on in the EU. I work for the national standards body for the UK, but obviously there are lots of member bodies, just national member bodies. Tim was mentioned, Sweden's, China. These are all member bodies of both ISO and CEN-CENELEC, ISO IC and CEN-CENELEC, and we're sort of equal member bodies, and we put the view of the UK from our perspective. We put the view of the UK experts and stakeholders into the standards making process, and obviously the other member bodies also channel their own national interests and national stakeholder expertise, and it's very important that that you should be in touch with your member body so that you can be part of the input into the development of usable and interoperable standards that will support what is happening in the regulatory sphere. So I think it's one thing to be aware of, that standards are not legislation, but they do support it, and they can be very useful tools that can help around good practice and compliance for what is coming. So and because they are common standards and they're consensus standards, they're built in order to be as consistent and overarching as possible, so that everybody is working from the same space and using the same language. And that's, although this is a confusing situation, I think it's a really important point to make, that standards should be able to help people once they, once the situation is clearer around what needs to be done. The standards will be very helpful in that. And I think so being involved in standards making from the beginning is really important. So I urge people to contact their national bodies and to say, what are we doing around this? What is the national committee doing? Can I take part in this? Can I feed my views as a user, as a practitioner, into this work? Because that is how the standards become stronger and become consistent and reliable, and the sort of thing that everybody will find useful and clear when the time comes. So that's the main point I wanted to make. I don't think I can't really add anything much to the actual detail of what's going on. I mean, because I'm not going to start talking about numbers of standards, because that will just, I think, send us all spinning. So thank you.
So thanks very much, Sarah. And I mean, one perhaps thing, building on what Sarah is saying, is there is within CEN there is something called Working Group 248. I've probably got this the wrong way around. Technical Committee 248, Working Group 39, that is dealing with circular textiles.
Textiles, yeah.
And what should be happening in all all countries that are part of CEN, so it's member states, it's UK, Norway, etc., etc. You should check whether you have mirror committees that are following the European activities, because from our side we found them they were a little bit quiet. There seems to me now a lot of activity within those groups happening, and indeed there is some sort of guidance document on design for circularity and development within that group. So again, that I can see that group perhaps becoming more important potentially in this sector around the product requirement side. We have, of course, have the DPP as another complex area. But did we have any questions, Virginie?
Yes, there is a few questions. So I guess that was the first one. Yeah, quite interesting. I think so. It was more related to the link about eco-modulation calculation, and there's a recently adopted Waste Framework Directive. And so they were asking if this eco-modulation will be based on the implementation of the quantitative performance requirements under the ESPR. So I don't know if maybe Ava has an idea about this.
They're not that I'm aware of, no, but it could be something that happens in the future. A lot of these, it's a directive, so it allows for national transposition. That means each EU member state can basically decide their own law, as long as they follow that directive as it's been written. So probably not, but it could in the future. I don't want to say that it doesn't, because obviously we don't know a lot about the ESPR still, but I would say unlikely, but could.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick comment on that. But again, this illustrates the complexity in the moving parts. We don't fully understand how the Commission is thinking about any relationships between the EPR for textiles and ESPR, and whether, for example, eco-modulation might come in some form into the eco-design for sustainable products regulation. So again, it sort of illustrates this constant set of cogs and moving parts that connect or not. Anyway, I'll shut up. So back to you, Virginie.
Yeah, so then we have two questions more focused on standards. So maybe for Sarah. So there is one is, does the European Commission have to validate and adopt the CNELEC standards? And if so, would this be through delegated act? And then second question is asking if there is an interoperability piece that will bring the different standards together for projects that may cross different sectors.
Yes, the CNELEC situation is CNELEC is the standards setting of the European area rather than the EU. However, there is a situation whereby the Commission asks CNELEC, as they have in this case, to make standards which will support some of the work that they're doing in regulatory spaces and policy spaces. This is particularly for things like the ESPR and the DPP aspect. Now, I think Martin mentioned harmonized standards. If a standard is harmonized, that means that they will mention it as something that is a way of meeting compliance for any legislation or regulations that they have instituted. Now, I think most of the time there are other ways to meet compliance without using standards, because standards are voluntary, they're not law in and of themselves. However, they can be referenced as they are often by the Commission when they are asking for specific standards tools that will support what they are doing. So I think what you'll find is that there is a lot of work, as we've just talked about, so the interoperability piece. Yes, I mean, it's quite mind-boggling because there's so many different pieces of work across so many different sectors. But as far as interoperability is concerned, yes, no standards are a really rigorous process they go through in a systems process in order to ensure that there isn't duplication and that there is an interoperability across what is being done in standards. Now, obviously, this is why we ask for people as you know, who are practitioners and as many relevant stakeholders as possible to take part in the work of developing the standards that are going to be used, because they're made by people who are going to use them. So I think that's a really key point. But as I say, as the intention is always interoperability and non-duplication, and that's what we aim for in standardization.
Right,
I hope that helps.
Just one quick comment. One thing that I didn't highlight, I did pick up in going through all the excellent research that Virginia has done to back up this presentation, was that there will be some seemingly, and again, may happen, it may not, seemingly some evaluation of the feasibility of paid for standards to support DPP, i.e. it may be so complex that, you know, expecting SMEs to pay, you know, large amounts for standards may just not be feasible. So one of the options they left open, you know, would be potentially, could free standards be provided from national standards bodies to, or maybe funded via national governments, via national standards bodies. I mean, I'm adding a couple of observations based on my experience here, but on what I read. But I did clock that point that for SMEs, particularly on the technical information architecture side of DPPs, if they're going to have to buy, you know, 10 different standards to bring all the different elements together, it's just not going to be affordable, maybe. So is there, you know, it goes back to Ava's point about cut down versions, cut down information. So, I mean, I think that whole element of support and guidance to enable implementation is going to be a big issue, and affordability, particularly with the omnibus activity that's going on throughout the Commission, that's simplifying, delaying, you know, et cetera, looking at cost feasibility, et cetera. Maybe we've got time just for a couple more questions.
Yeah, I was thinking we can just finish with the two last questions, because like this it will be recorded either so people can hear the answer. The two last one are quite quick. It's mostly about DPP. There's one about someone asking about how to verify the data that we integrate the DPP, like because you mentioned that people can make mistake or even lie while integrating the data. So asking about how we can make sure it's accurate and reliable. And the other question is more simple. I think that it's about how, you know, the DPP will physically be present in garments. So I know that it's already mentioned like QR code and things like that that will be on the garment. So yes, that are the last question.
They might be quite quick answers. In terms of verification of data, it's absolutely a discussion point. It's been brought up many times. The answer is currently unclear. Obviously, you know, having something that is able to verify all the data is absolutely another layer to the complexity that's the DPP on its own. So, but it is absolutely a discussion point, but there isn't a clear answer on that. And in terms of how the DPP will be in the garments, various types of digital label are being discussed. So QR, RFID, barcode, you know, what I don't know, I'm not a massive tech person, but that, you know, those types of things all being discussed. I don't anticipate that one type will be selected and mandated, and just some form of digital label will be mandated. I know a lot of businesses are opting for QR, but I think it will be just some form that's mandated. It won't be a specific type.
Thank you.
Okay, well, yeah, so
there is one point just in the chat that I'd just like to just address, just in case it's relevant for anyone listening. I can see that there's something to do with fashion brands starting their collections in advance and not leaving enough time. And obviously I mentioned the implementation period, and something that obviously UKFT see as important is extending that period of time. But it does mention at the end that it's important to prepare. And I'd just like to touch on that just in case. Obviously, there is no harm in preparing early, but for businesses that don't want to do that, I think it's just worth highlighting the cost of premature compliance. I represent about 600 brands and retailers. I've had quite a few speak to me on the basis that they've been missold some sort of solution in the last year or two, and they are stuck in a contract. Needing to get out of the contract. They're not, obviously, at this point in time, we do not know what that regulatory text is going to mandate. We don't know what's going to be required. And the cost of premature compliance, we have facts and figures on that. It has cost some of our smaller brands and retailers, but also our larger brands and retailers a significant amount of money that they didn't feel like they needed to spend. So all for being prepared. I'm a very prepared person, but I think it's very important to highlight that there is no importance of premature compliance on this topic, or any regulation for that matter. Because the cost and administrative burden and the effects on business can be quite detrimental. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
Great. Well, thanks for that. I guess from our point of view, our observation is 1,000% reinforcement of that. In effect, there's a lot of greenwashing out there. And until the compliance framework is clear, nobody can claim to offer compliance services, because nobody has perfect knowledge out there. Even Ava, ourselves, trying to really track this with experience, there's a lot of question marks, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ambiguity. So I don't believe your vast majority of consultants will be 10 times in advancement of ourselves. So be very wary. But I think, at least from my side, preparation in-house to start to, raise awareness of these issues, to start to think about if then, that is all time that will be usefully spent, I think. But be really, really careful about, somebody that offers you a sort of a golden egg, because that golden egg will change colour or crack or disappear. Anyway, my awful metaphors there. So anyway, well, thanks Ava, thanks Virginie for your support on this, and thanks everybody for your time on this. And we will be holding another webinar in November around EPR. So keep a lookout for the e-shot of the LinkedIn, and we'll keep trying to track this stuff and liaise with Ava and BSI to keep up to date with stuff. So thanks all, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.